Hi, I'm Erik Voss.
And I'm Filup Molina.
And this is a breakdown of Game of Thrones Season 7 premiere titled Dragonstone.
So, welcome everybody. If you are new to these videos, we like to go super incredibly in-depth in our analysis, pointing out all the moments that you might have missed and subtle connections to the books, and even the history of Westeros.
Plus, a ton of influences from our real-world culture. But also, all these awesome little layers of meaning and the visuals and the editing and music and dialogue, set design, costumes, art, sound effects. We are going to break it down super in depth. There's a lot of rich thematic subtext.
By the way, this is the season premiere of Game of Thrones, so it is so packed. This is gonna be a like mega fully loaded video. I would lay back if I were you. Just relax.
Get comfortable.
Yeah. And then after that, maybe go watch Westeros Weekly, which I shot with Mod Garrett, and we talked about all kinds of awesome stuff there too, and predictions and stuff. It's great.
Great, let's get started.
Okay, we're going fast. Before I get to the amazing cold open that happened, which is not a common thing, I have to talk about the previously on montage. They've been putting so much meaning into these lately. So usually the purpose is just to remind you of specific scenes from past episodes to set up the scenes of this episode. And this one, yeah, does that really well. But it's everything else that's going on in the previously ons. Like for instance, did you hear it? There's a piano in there, and now pianos are fair game. For the first time in Game of Thrones history, they use pianos in the instrumentation in the season 6 finale. And now we get it right here at the beginning.
And in addition to those piano notes, notice how the editing of this whole sequence is super jarring. Like it's calm and quiet, and then suddenly there's just a burst of sound as the wildfire explodes and people scream. And I think all that is just to make us feel super on edge at the beginning of this episode and at the beginning of the season. Like there's all kinds of surprising violence that could sneak up on us at any moment.
But now going straight into the actual amazing, mind-blowing, cold open scene that felt like it was its own freaking movie. Note the cloth over the hands. If you think about what's happened here, it means Arya has made Frey gloves. She's wearing his skin like they're sleeves that a Rockstar wears. I love it.
Yeah, and side note about cold opens in general, it's pretty rare on Game of Thrones to see a scene that plays before the credits. Like they've only done it about 6 times. They did it in the pilot and the season premiere of seasons 3, 4, and 5. And then they did it one time last season to hide that Rory McCann was gonna appear in an episode again. Now, and I think the reason they do this is that it's meant as a teaser for the whole season to kind of set the tone of what kind of season this is gonna be. And specifically in this case, we notice how Arya's storyline here feels like it's outside of the events of the show, right? Like this is crazy. She's using false identities and amazingly perfect vocal impressions of Walder Frey. It kind of feels like something that might be in a Mission Impossible movie, or that this is a scene out of a Tarantino Kill Bill movie.
Oh, Arya's Kill Bill. Do it. Send it to us. Hashtag Rockstars. We'll share it on a show.
If only she had a list of people she was gonna kill, then it would be perfect. Oh wait, she does!
Who's on that list?
Are we gonna do it now?
You might as well.
Okay, who's left remaining? Cersei Lannister, the Mountain,
Beric Dondarrion,
Thoros of Myr.
The Hound?
The Hound? Well, she thinks the Hound is dead, so it might have been X'd out. The Red Woman is on that list, though. And who can forget Sir Ilyn Payne?
I say nothing. You don't have no tongue.
So we love about him.
But moving back into the cold open for a second, note what Arya said.
Stand together.
She uses the Frey house word, stand together. She also then later evokes the idea of the wolf left alone.
Leave one wolf alive, and the sheep are never safe.
So if you think about it, Arya loves saying that they all stand together like sheep, and she gets to be that lone wolf that just chomps them all up.
But the problem with that is, as we saw in the teaser, Sansa was repeating that phrase about
the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives.
Of course, quoting her father, Ned Stark, that explaining how the Starks need to stick together when the winter arrives. Arya taking pride in being the lone wolf is kind of a bad sign for her.
And then moving on to what she says a little later.
You didn't slaughter every one of the Starks. That was your mistake. You should have ripped them all out, root and stem.
Rip them out, root and stem. It's kind of a reference to something Pycelle has said in the books, but actually I think it's much more interesting that she is so contrasted right now with Ned Stark, who had the exact same dilemma in front of him about whether or not the Targaryens should be ripped out, root and stem, and he's the one that tells Robert Baratheon, no, don't kill every single last one of them, that's just a little girl. And now in this case, 2 little girls that were not ripped out, root and stem, them have come for vengeance.
Okay, so now we get to the real opening images of the episode, and it's this long static shot of an icy terrain from Bran's point of view and his vision. And notice how the wind is blowing away from the camera. Meanwhile, the White Walker wind in the distance is blowing towards the camera. So this is a really disorienting, surreal look, something that's in a nightmare. And yeah, this is a long static shot, and it lasts for nearly 2 minutes unbroken, and it's symmetrical, which is actually a director trademark of the director of this episode, Jeremy Podeswa. And yeah, this is meant to make us feel like we feel like in a normal nightmare, as we're static, not able to move, as this doom moves its way toward us, kind of like Michael Myers in Halloween or in the movie It Follows.
But actually, my favorite thing that's going on in this vision is if you look closely, look at what all these wights are wearing. It's the latest in free folk fashion. This is what everyone was wearing at Hardhome, which means those that were risen there are now officially part of the undead army. But even more shocking is the giant wights that also went down there and other places above the wall. And everybody's asking, a lot of you asked, is one of them 1-1?
Which one? That one? Actually, the actor who played 1-1, Ian Wight, is credited in this episode, so it made me think maybe that could be 1-1 resurrected.
And 1-1 is missing an eye.
That's right, Ramsay shot it out with an arrow in the Battle of the Bastards, but that eye was 1-1's right eye, whereas this giant wight is missing his left eye. So I'm thinking this is probably a different giant.
Theory busted? Maybe?
Maybe.
I hope so, because I don't want 1-1 to be bad, but I also love 1-1, so I want to see him come back even if he's undead.
But maybe theory unbunked, because look at what's under the snow here. That looks like it could be grass, making me think that maybe this location isn't north of the wall, but it's actually south of the wall. And what Bran is seeing here is the future. We know that in his visions in the past, he's been able to see into the future. And maybe what we're seeing here are actually all the dead from the Battle of the Bastards and all the conflicts south of the wall resurrecting and moving their way further south.
On the other side of the freaking wall.
On our side of the wall.
Since we're in this kind of theory time, mini theory time right now, I'm gonna throw in a little theory too. There's a giant back there who looks like he's carrying a longbow. So in the books, back during Aegon's conquest, there was a thought that maybe there was a way to resist Aegon's 3 dragons if they were to make a weapon that was powerful enough to take down a dragon. And specifically, they made longbows out of weirwood trees. So if that giant has a giant longbow made out of weirwood tree, that could be a weapon that could take down Daenerys' dragons.
So moving on, I like how when Bran and Mira arrive at the north gate of Castle Black, I love how Bran is able to prove his identity just by giving an ominous warning, and that's proof enough for Dorset.
Sounds like a Stark to me.
Also, some of you are asking, how does Bran know that Ed was at the Fist and at Hardhome? Like, is Bran a mind reader? Well, he's not exactly a mind reader, but as a three-eyed raven, he does have a near omniscient view of history, and that's through all the faces of the weirwood trees. Remember, all those faces are kind of recording history as it happens throughout the ages of Westeros, and Bran, as three-eyed raven, has access to all those visions, past and present and future.
He's got the internet in his head. Now moving on to one of these scenes in the Great Hall of Winterfell. I feel like we're gonna see a lot of scenes here around this time. Jon is talking about what they have to do to get their minds right and their people prepared to take out the White Walker army. And he very specifically references something that is unheard of. The idea of women and children not getting rescued first, but taking up arms. And that is something that is really fascinating because even in our own history, that has happened from time to time. Now, there are definitely armies that have used women. For instance, in the Israeli army, the reason why they've had to enlist women in their forces is because there's just not enough people to give them a proper defense without women. But really, the idea that times are so dire that even children must take up arms reminds me a lot of the American Revolution, where really, I mean, if you were 13, you were well old enough to go into battle. And this is even worse than that situation. It just really shows you how dire things have gotten. Wolf. But there's one slight glimmer of something positive out of that. Notice that Jon Snow has just started the end of the age of women being treated differently from men. Brienne's been on this path for a long time, but someone like the King of the North finally embracing the idea that women can fight just as well as men. That, at least for the future of Westeros, could be great.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it was really Ygritte who instilled that idea of chivalry having to come to an end in Jon. So really, by making this argument, he's honoring her memory. But one really cool thing about this scene is if you're looking closely, the editing and the reaction shots of all the characters are really telling a secret conversation that's going on during Jon's speech.
Yeah, if you were watching this and you were like, I feel like there's something going on between all these people, you're right. We're gonna break that down for you. Each person here is actually thinking about someone that they've lost.
Right, so we start with badass little lady Lyanna Mormont. That was fun to say. And she's staring at Brienne, admiring this female warrior, and it's reminding her of her mother, Mage Mormont, who has passed away. She was a great great warrior as well.
But then when Jon says, not just the boys, that wasn't an impression at all. I thought it was going to be.
I thought it was perfect.
I thought it was going to be an impression.
I was like, mine next to Kit Harington? Or?
Brienne looks over at Jon and she's impressed that he would allow women to serve. Boom, she's being reminded of Renly Baratheon. He let her serve.
And then Lyanna interrupts Lord Glover by saying, I won't knit while I let men serve for me. And Brienne nods approving. And in that moment, Lyanna reminds her of herself as a young girl picking fights with these bigger men. And then Davos smirks the moment when Lyanna interrupts Glover again. And of course, he's thinking about Shireen Baratheon. And notice how his smile fades a little bit because, yeah, he's remembering what happened to her.
Each one of them is reminiscing about someone they've lost or a version of themselves that they've lost. And it's all done through editing. That's awesome.
Okay, so right here, Jon starts dropping some important references to places on the map. He mentions Hardhome, Eastwatch by the Sea, Carhold, and Last Heart. And if you think about it, this is really the first time on the show where they've really started to define where things are in relation to each other on the map. Like in the past, it's just been kind of like, they're in the north right now, or in the south, or they're very far away. Maps, of course, have been shown, obviously in the opening credit sequence, but usually it's really zoomed in and we don't really get a sense of where things are. But this episode changes all of that.
And not just in the way where it's like, great, we know geography better now. It's actually a thematic reason they're introducing all of these maps and the talk about where everyone is and specifically how near they are. So one of the major themes of this episode is that the world as we know it is shrinking. People and places are coming together, getting a little too close to each other. It's becoming almost a small town where you can't even avoid bumping into each other.
We're becoming 4x3. No. And this whole idea of geography and maps and where things are in relation to each other comes up throughout this episode. And we'll point it out as we go. Next up, notice that when Sansa openly defies Jon, look at her costume. Now, this is totally new for this season. The costume designer Michelle Clapton described this as she wanted a real strength and she wanted Sansa to have embraced everything that's happened to her.
And wear it like armor, much like how Tyrion told Jon Snow to do about the things that have attacked him. But running down, our style expert, go ahead.
All right, designers, we got a heavy belt that wraps around the neck and goes to the waistline, covering a double-breasted dress. Basically, the idea is she wanted Sansa's inner monologue to be, no one will ever get to me again. Then check out that circular necklace. That evokes the one back from Black Swansa, to use his, use his term, back in season 4. Also, they want to work in some of the feathers from that dress back in the earring. But then if you look super closely, look at the pattern of the stitching. The designer wanted that to look like fishes swimming, of course, to honor her mother, Catelyn, who was a Tully.
So Sansa's really taking all of her influences and all of her mentors and experiences, good or bad, and combining them and putting them together and saying like, yeah, I'm gonna wear that.
And the result of that is that Sansa now kind of has this seeming combative relationship with Jon. When they disagree, Jon says that famous line from Ned Stark that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Now, of course, Robb Stark lived by that advice as well, which led him to execute Rickard Stark during the War of the Five Kings. And that, of course, doomed him into needing more troops, having to try to work with the Freys, and that was a very bad idea. And then that resulted in the Karstarks turning against Robb Stark, abandoning him in the war, and forcing Robb Stark into the Red Wedding. And really, that insistence on justice, the father's justice, is what doomed Robb Stark as well as it doomed Ned Stark. And Sansa is really mistakenly trying to advise Jon on doing the same by pissing off all the Karstarks in the name of justice.
Instead of taking her advice, Jon actually decides, I'm not going to punish a man for his father's sins. Now, Jon isn't only thinking about this one instance. You got to remember that Jon himself was punished for being a bastard by Catelyn Stark. She was so incredibly mean to him because of something that he didn't do, but rather his father's deeds. Ironically, this is the idea of Jon showing the mother's mercy, even though he never saw that from his mother. But also something that sets up really nicely is that Jon's probably not going to hold the Targaryens' deeds against Daenerys either.
But moving on, let's talk about the two sweet kids who thankfully Jon spared his justice. There's Ned Umber and Alice Karstark. And Ned, of course, is probably named after Ned Stark. And that hilt on the sword might be familiar to you. See those two Umber chain circles? This is the same sword that Small Jon Umber used and his father, Great Jon Umber, back in season 1.
There's a bit of another theme running through this episode, and we see the beginning of it with this idea that wars of yesterday don't matter anymore. Now, of course, Jon is referring to the War of the Five Kings and the divisions there, but in our real world, that reminds me a lot of what happened with us in World War II, the Allied powers being composed of our former enemies. France and Britain were really old rivals, and so were the US and Britain, actually.
Yeah, we fought a war of independence against.
Right. Yeah. And then very famously, the US and the USSR
hated each other.
And yet again, this is an instance where that doesn't matter anymore. There's a greater threat, and this is actually going to come back a little bit later.
But before we get to that equally in-depth, important concept, let's explain a poop joke. Notice how Jon quotes a less honorable line from his father.
Everything before the word butt is horse shit.
And sorry to explain this joke, but yeah, think about it. Everything before a horse's butt is literally, you get the idea.
It wouldn't be after the butt?
Well, if he's a constipated horse.
Oh, the constipated horse.
Anyway, after Jon and Sansa make up as brother and sister, or cousin and cousin, whatever, Jon receives Cersei's letter. And we can see, if you look closely at what's written on the piece of paper, Cersei calls Jon the rebel and the bastard Jon Snow. And then when Sansa asks him what it said, Jon repeats every part of his letter, but he conveniently leaves off that part, and it's probably because he's still afraid of being undermined.
Not only because he's sensitive to the word bastard after Ramsay's pink letter, where he used that word repeatedly, but also saying the word bastard in front of Sansa could remind her that really his claim is not quite as legitimate as hers.
And of course, you might remember Cersei saying the phrase bend the knee is the same empty assurance that she gave Ned Stark back in season 1. Eventually, he did end up bending the knee, and look how that turned out for him.
And as we get into the debate that Jon and Sansa are having, they talk about how there's one enemy that he's been consumed with in the north, and he's forgot all about the one to the south. Now, that specific idea of potentially fighting a war on two fronts has been the decider in a lot of different wars, including one of the major reasons why we won World War II. Also discussing how many miles there are between them and Cersei, we're really diving into this map and measurement of the geography, and again, it's hitting home that not only is Westeros shrinking, but Sansa specifically feels it's shrinking from the south, Jon feels it's shrinking from the north. Side note, Jon actually kind of knows what he's talking about. Attacking from the south into the north is so incredibly difficult. It's rarely ever been done in the history of Westeros, and there's monsters within 300 miles of you. Listen to your big bro.
Yeah, and notice how Jon accuses Sansa of admiring Cersei, and she doesn't deny it. And funny coincidence here, notice how her hair is the same style as Cersei's in the past. So once again, there's another example of some past influencer working its way into Sansa's wardrobe.
Speaking of Cersei,
Whose accent is that?
mine. We gotta move on to King's Landing. And Westeros, again hitting our theme home, is literally shrunken down underneath the foot of a giant Cersei stepping on the map.
Yeah, and as we see this clear bird's eye view of Westeros, Jaime says this episode's title.
Dragonstone.
It's interesting how the location of Dragonstone has kind of become a symbol for this whole idea. It used to be this faraway, isolated place where Stannis just sat and simmered for several seasons, and now we see it on a map.
Specifically, how close it is to King's Landing. That is so crazy. Like, if you want to really understand how close it is, go watch Westeros Weekly. We've got this awesome map thing that I built in the middle of the night, and I stayed up all night doing it, but where we can actually see how close everyone is. I'm saying they can, like, see each other almost.
They'll reach out and slap each other in the face.
Okay, not that close. But really, the point here, if you look at the map and you see these pieces, it's all reminiscent also of a game board. It's like you're playing Settlers of Catan or something. And really, that's another theme of this episode. Everyone pausing and taking a moment to figure out their strategy of what is going to be their next move in the game. As Gandalf would say, it's the board is set and the pieces are moving.
Right, are you going to put that town on a brick and ore and...
No Settlers references. This is a Settlers of Catan reference. I don't want it. Let's go, move on.
And notice how when Cersei lists all these different female enemies of hers, she uses a different offensive female slur for each of them, which we can't really say.
We're not gonna say any of them.
But it's just clear that Cersei is not really a woman other women would look up to, because she hates every woman who isn't her.
Oh, also, I just gotta say, I think we all loved Jaime when he calls out, by the way, Queen of 7 Kingdoms, try 3 kingdoms at best. What's amazing is that he's not wrong about any of the monarchs that have ruled here. Even Aegon the Conqueror wasn't able to rule over Dorne. So really, ruling the 7 kingdoms is something that people just kind of say. Now, a lot of you are wondering which kingdoms they kind of have under them still.
Our best guess is that he's referring to the Western lands, where Casterly Rock is located, of course, and then the Stormlands, where Baratheon territory Storm's End is. It doesn't seem like they're up in rebellion against him. And then it seems like the Riverlands are still under the control, even though Arya has wiped out the Freys.
Which is why he's kind of like at best.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the North, the Reach, the Vale, and Dorne are all in open rebellion against the Crown.
So Jeremy Podeswa, the director of this episode, he loves to play with size and perspective. One thing he does a lot is show these huge wide shots, but also something he does is play with angles to make false size implications throughout a scene, and it happens here between Cersei and Jaime. Now, specifically at the beginning of the scene, Cersei appears like a giant, crushing Westeros right at the neck. She looks like she's towering over Jaime, especially as she's reminding him that he's the one that let Tyrion get away. But then Jaime joins Cersei on the map, and he kind of offers his wisdom, and now they look about equal size. But then there's a really dramatic dramatic shift when Tommen gets brought up.
Right, notice how Cersei literally retreats from this conversation, and now Jaime looks noticeably larger. Cersei's eyeline has changed. She has to look up at him because he has the moral high ground now. And then finally, when Cersei reveals that she won't mourn Tommen and she has no heart left, Jaime goes back and stands on the map alone, exactly where Cersei began the scene on the twins. He is a giant now, and she looks small.
Now moving on to Euron Greyjoy's fleet. Specifically, I gotta call out that badass ship. That thing looks like it's straight out of a Jules Verne novel. It matches the description of the books, by the way, with the multiple side sails, the Greyjoy Kraken on the bow, 2 battering ram extensions, one on the bottom, which kind of looks like almost like a snow plow or something, just push other small boats out of the way or something. And then there's the one more jagged one designed to actually puncture freaking hulls. That ship is real good at stabbing other ships. Also note that it's very ready for battle with the shields lined up on the side of the deck, which helps block against projectiles and arrows.
Now in the scene, notice how everyone has changed armor, Jaime included, but check out the Mountain's new armor. This black Darth Vader-y looking armor is now the standard armor of all the King's Guard. And I think Darth Vader really was the model for creating this kind of armor. In fact, in Star Wars, all the Empire's armor and uniforms were modeled off of the Germans in World War II. The Stormtroopers actually got that name from the Nazi Stormtroopers. These new King's Guard helmets, like the Stormtrooper helmets, cover their faces, make them look more conformist, inhuman, robotic, killing machines, all like the Mountain.
I think Cersei maybe just being so sweet, and her now boy of hers that is kind of the closest thing she has to a son is the Mountain, and she feels bad that he has to cover his ugly face. So she's like, well, everyone else will cover their face and no one will laugh at you, Mountain.
She's just arranging play dates with all the King's Guard where they all have to be there.
Yeah.
And yes, if you were looking at the background here, you probably noticed that there are now these red Lannister banners hanging from the walls, which means that Cersei replaced all the Baratheon stags with Lannister lions, as well as the 7-pointed star stained glass window in the throne room, which she replaced with a Lannister lion. But that's not all that changed. Look at this guy.
Hey! Okay, we gotta talk about Euron's costume and his delivery. A lot of people feel like it maybe changed abruptly. I actually think this is just the way he is. He's manipulative. He's different around a woman that he's trying to seduce than the men that he was trying to inspire earlier. But mostly the thing to notice is the guy looks like a freaking rock star. A lot of people might compare him to Jack Sparrow, but you gotta remember Jack Sparrow was based on a rock star, Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. It's also worth pointing out, it's not the craziest transformation. This is a lot more what he was like in the books. He was flamboyant and he was kind of addicted to the equivalent of heroin in the books as well. So he's basically your classic rock star that's just been waiting for a lady to perform in front of.
Yeah, and that seduction, remember, was actually intended for another queen, Daenerys. That's what he was talking about when he wanted to give her his big, But really, now that Theon and Yara beat him to the punch, he has swapped out one queen for another.
And didn't change his tactics at all. I'm sure Cersei would not like knowing this fact, by the way. But something else that he uses to try to get to her is the fact that she has a traitorous family member. He has a traitorous family member. I really like, though, Jaime reminding both of them that he actually was the first traitorous sibling when he murdered his brother. And he's also encouraging Cersei to become a traitorous family member. So you can get why Cersei's like, yeah, I can't trust this kind of crazy. But I think she will eventually, actually.
And of course, if you were paying attention, Euron subtly reminds us of the theme of this episode. He said that he actually was cool with Jaime killing all of his kin on the Iron Islands because it was getting too crowded. The world as he knew it was shrinking. He also touches on geography with offering to kill the invaders to the east and pretenders to the north and south.
By the way, there's a lot of debate about what Euron's gift is gonna be. We've had some ideas in Westeros Weekly, but specifically we want to know what you guys think his gift is gonna be, so let us know in the comments what it could be. I have a theory about a certain imp, but maybe you guys have a different one.
Okay, moving on to Old Town, and guys, we gotta talk about this disgusting montage. But just like in Winterfell earlier, the editing is really effective at telling a story without using any dialogue. Notice how all the sound cues sync up with the sound of the pouring soup, matching the sound of the pouring shit.
You also got to notice the specific choice to cut from a bowl that looks like it's got poop in it to a bowl of the soup that they eat.
And yeah, telling this non-verbally makes it way more interesting. Like, imagine we could just have a boring scene with him complaining about his job to Gilly as he comes home covered in the Maester's crap. But instead, using this repetition and shock imagery makes us feel exactly what Sam is feeling in this moment: boredom and disgust.
What they're doing basically is what Edgar Wright does. He can tell a whole story and a lot of character backstory of what's been going on in this guy's life by using these tight close-ups, these staccato cuts. You've seen it in Shaun of the Dead, you saw it in Hot Fuzz, The World's End. You actually just saw it in Baby Driver. Go check out our Baby Driver video. But really, it's just a really fun way to show a passage of time that is packed with information.
Yeah, and really the only break that Sam gets from this routine is this rare glimpse of an open textbook inside this forbidden section. If you look closely, it looks like some maester is trying to explain how this planet orbits around the sun and its solar system.
Now, this isn't just some nerdy maester who's obsessed with astronomy, which is actually pretty cool, so I don't know why I called it nerdy. Seasons are impacted by where the planet is located in its orbit around the sun. And seasons are the entirety of the generation of the drama that causes this Game of Thrones, with the North having its forever winter and the South being in summer for years and years and years. So there's actually two really fascinating theories as to what is up with this planet, why they could have winter for so long and then summer for so long. And one of them is tied to the magic of the White Walkers themselves.
Yeah, let's look back at that opening image. Remember, the wind was blowing one way away from camera, whereas the White Walker cloud was bringing winter toward us. So my thought is that maybe the winds of winter aren't something natural, it's something that the White Walkers control themselves. Remember back in last season, we saw when the White Walkers are created, that whole tree area went from a summery look to a wintry look. It's as if the season of winter didn't exist until the White Walkers were created. In fact, if you remember when we saw the White Walkers first get created, that whole region, wherever it was, went from nice warm summer to later when we saw the same location to cold dead winter. The implication being that maybe the whole season of winter didn't exist in this world until the magic that created the White Walkers created that season as well.
So that's the magic theory, but the second theory I think is super interesting because there's actually a scientific reason why this all might be happening. But first, shocker, we have to pay to make these videos, and our sponsor is helping us out and paying for this video. It's Quid. Thank you so much to them. Again, they pay for these exact videos, and luckily it's actually a pretty cool sponsor. Quid is this awesome new app where you can collect these stickers and cards and 3D figures for free all on your phone. Instead of using like emojis, you can actually make jokes with your friends in the conversation with their stickers from your favorite properties. And what's special about Quid is that they have thousands of free stickers that you can't find anywhere else, specifically from these shows that we love. Like boom, they just finally got Game of Thrones. I've been using Rick and Morty stickers all week, but now I'm gonna switch over to Game of Thrones stickers. So I can drop You Know Nothing Jon Snow, some Dracarys Heat Fire, and just like saucy little character cutouts. And literally you just like drag and drop it onto your iMessage.
They also do these cool 3D recreations of those Funko Pop figures, and we're gonna do a giveaway for all you guys where if you follow New Rockstars on Twitter and share this video with the hashtag #HouseNewRockstars, we'll pick some of you randomly and send you a Funko Pop vinyl Game of Thrones figure.
Boom, for free, just for sharing the video. Oh, and by the by, we came up with our own stickers that are on there that I think are hilarious to point out the clickbait of your own text messages. And then also, you can just make your own stickers from your own pictures. That's a new feature they just released. But they also come out with a bunch more every single day anyway.
Just click on the link below in the description and hit us up on Quid. Our username is New Rockstars, and share some stickers with us.
You can trade, and we got a real good collection. But back to that second theory about the weird seasons of Westeros. We got the magic reason, but I love the science reason. There were grad students at Johns Hopkins who wrote their entire freaking thesis arguing that Game of Thrones' irregular seasons could be the result of a binary star system, like two suns, like freaking Tatooine style. And the planet is actually orbiting the suns almost in like a figure-8 pattern, which would make the seasons extremely irregular and unpredictable, except for people that live thousands of years maybe would eventually find a pattern.
That's awesome. Maybe Lady Melisandre figured it out. Now, Archmaester Ebros is played by Jim Broadbent, and you may recognize him. He played Professor Slughorn in the Harry Potter movies, and this is interesting because this is the same kind of scenario, right? There's a student approaching a professor about accessing these books in a restricted section and learning about this old magic.
A restricted section is a common thing in libraries. I want to know what's behind mine. Probably grown-up stuff.
Yeah. And notice what Ebros says here.
The simplest explanation for your grating obsession with the White Walkers is that you're telling the truth.
Ebros is applying the concept of Occam's razor, you know, where you remove all the unnecessary explanations as if you're doing it with a razor before arriving at the simplest answer.
And what's great about this is he's actually using this concept as he's literally doing that with the scientific method. Through his autopsy, he's cutting away all the organs that are not the explanation that lead to this man's death, and finally arrives at the most obvious answer. He's got liver disease from alcoholism.
Yeah, that thing's huge.
I thought it was a baby.
Also, of course, Ebros brings us back to that idea idea of maps and geography.
We're not like the people south of the Twins, and we're not like the people north of the Twins.
But this lecture that he gives Sam about the world never truly ending is interesting.
The Wall has stood through it all.
Honestly, this guy kind of sounds like those experts who said that the Titanic was unsinkable or the Hindenburg was unexplodable.
Unpoppable. The wall will never go down. But anyway, let's actually fast forward past Tormund and Brain doing the eye upping thing and Sansa coldly shutting down Littlefinger. And we're gonna go to boom, the thing that everybody on the internet is talking about, Ed freaking Sheeran. It feels almost like a different show when he's on screen.
How far do we fast forward? Also, keep in mind, Game of Thrones has featured a lot of cameos by real life musicians like the drummer from Coldplay, Sugar Rose of Monsters and Men, and the main soldier in this scene is the son of late character actor Pete Postlethwaite. That's kind of a distracting cameo too, right?
No, no one caught that at all.
Yeah.
There actually is a cool backstory to the lyrics of the song he's singing though. In the books, that same song is sung by Simon Silvertongue, and he's this fat-bellied singer in King's Landing who finds out about Tyrion's relationship with Shae, and he tries to blackmail him through the song. It's about a guy who came down from his hill through the streets of the city to see his hidden woman. A chain and a keep are nothing are referring to Tyrion's red keep and the chain he used to sink Stannis' fleet in the Battle of Blackwater.
But then Tyrion orders Bronn to make this singer disappear so he can't blackmail him, and it's implied that Bronn dumps the singer's body into this well-known stew that's served in Flea Bottom that's filled with a bunch of weird meat that came from weird places. So if you aren't the biggest fan of Ed Sheeran being in Game of Thrones, maybe the show will use this story in a very fun way with this Lannister singer finding out about Arya's secret and then trying to blackmail her, and then Arya turning him into a delicious ginger-flavored stew.
What I find fascinating about that is that she's really at a crossroads. She could be reminded of the love of her family and the good in people, or she can go down a real dark path and cook up Sheeran Boy.
And let's take a look at those two different branches, because they give you two different ways of looking at the scene. Like, one is in a more positive light. Arya is hitting it off with Lannister soldiers. Like, when have Lannister bannermen on the road ever been nice in the show? She's finding their common humanity, and this almost feels like another World War II reference, because doesn't it feel like this scene could be right out of Saving Private Ryan? Like all these soldiers away from home sharing their memories to their family members.
But there's a much darker way of looking at it. So notice how the soldiers mention how they used to want to get away, now they just want to go home. One scoffs at the idea of fighting in another man's war. Arya, if she's dark-minded, she's thinking, hey, these Lannisters have lost their will to fight. She even tests her resolve by straight up admitting that she's gonna assassinate their queen. So in that version, Arya could be taking up the role of Lady Stoneheart from the books. She's the murderous threat in the Riverland. She's just taking out any men from the families that wronged her family.
And beyond Lady Stoneheart, Arya might be representing an even bigger figure. Notice this line from the Lannister soldiers.
But my mother always told me to be kind to strangers. Strangers to be kind to you.
So I think there's some symbolism here. The stranger is one of these 7 new gods. And unlike those other gods, people rarely ever pray to the stranger. They fear that figure because he or she, no one really knows what this figure looks like, represents death. And traits of the other 7 appear in a lot of characters on the show, but Arya is clearly the stranger now. Her time in exile and her time with the Faceless Men has made her into this anonymous, deadly figure. No one knows her true appearance, and yes, we just saw her wipe out an entire house.
And these Lannister men don't realize it, but they're having dinner with death right now. The person who caused the Riverland chaos that they're supposed to contain is this person, and this soldier has no idea how wise he is by being kind to the stranger. But she might cook him into a stew anyway.
And if it is that darker version of Arya's journey, it's interesting that we're now immediately moving on to the opposite version of that journey with the other part of her famous duo, Sandor Clegane the Hound, who appears to be coming into the light. And we know that because this farmhouse is the same location that they stayed at in season 4. Remember, he stole this farmer's silver and he left him injured, and he is feeling this guilt in this moment. That's why he doesn't want to stay there. He's probably the reason why this guy's dead.
So that feeling sets up that when they're inside of the house, the Hound is questioning Beric about why the Lord of Light would bring back a man like him who's not special. He's actually talking about himself. He feels guilty that he gets to stay alive, and in a way, keeps coming back too.
And I love this line from the Hound.
It's my fucking luck I end up with a band of fire worshippers.
This is a huge moment for him. The contrition he feels for causing these innocents to die leads him to facing his longtime fear of fire. His greatest vulnerability is now becoming a source of strength.
It's actually really common in storytelling that the hero be tested with his most elemental fear, specifically one that's often a little associated with maybe the fear of a child. and that always ends up being a huge part of their growth.
Yeah, so for example, there was Indiana Jones, who famously hates snakes, so what happens to him in that movie? Yeah, he gets thrown in a snake pit. And in a more thematic example, there was Chris Nolan's Batman movies. Bruce Wayne learns to embrace the bat, which is something that scares him as a kid. Later, he uses it as a symbol that he can use against his enemies.
So now Clegane is having to embrace the fire as the new thing he's gonna worship.
And when the Hound looks into the flames, he sees the wall and a castle by the sea. Now, this is probably referencing Eastwatch by the Sea, which is the same castle that Tormund is going to. And then, yeah, look what happens when he brings it up. Firelog snaps. Obviously, we aren't meant to expect this castle to hold for much longer.
Will Tormund survive? That's actually my real question.
And yeah, I'm betting that the Brotherhood is now headed to the same location.
Also, a quick reminder about where we've left the Hound in the books. We still don't know where he is, but there's a theory that he might be this grave digger that we see in A Feast for Crows. Now, that's been a huge fan theory for a long time, so it feels like this moment is actually an acknowledgement that, yeah, that probably is him in the books too.
And before we move on from this, notice the prayer that the Hound says after he buries the father and daughter. The Hound is trying to remember the prayer that the father said to bless the meal, but the Hound doesn't remember how it goes because he cut him off.
We ask the Father to judge us with mercy. We ask the Mother to... Fuck it, I don't remember the rest.
Back to Old Town, the most exciting place in Westeros. Sam now has a book about Dragonglass, which John specifically has just talked about all the maesters looking for information about Dragonglass. Well, here it is. But specifically, we want to point out this drawing of this dagger. That looks exactly like the same dagger that Littlefinger gave to the assassin to kill Bran way back in season 1.
Yeah, in fact, there was a photo shoot of everyone in costume, and the cover of Entertainment Weekly showed Arya carrying that same dagger at her hip. So Arya could get this dagger before this season's over. Either way, clearly the show intends for this dagger to come back in some way. The question is, how will Arya get it? And if it ends up being kind of a smoking gun for Littlefinger's actual involvement in Bran's assassination attempt.
This dagger could bring down the whole House of Baelish, which is like one person.
Yeah.
But also, Sam does mention that Stannis had previously brought up the Dragonglass existed on Dragonstone. We saw that conversation.
That's Dragonglass.
A mountain of it. Stannis told me, but I didn't think this is important.
But also notice that he specifically says, a mountain of Dragonglass. That is a callback to the end of that same season where Jon Snow specifically tells Sam, we're gonna need a mountain of it if we want to beat the White Walkers. Things are looking pretty good.
For everyone except Jorah Mormont, yes, that is his hand that lunges out at Sam at Old Town. And notice how severe the grayscale has gotten. It's practically falling apart now. But I think the reason we're seeing Jorah here is that Sam could use a Dragonglass to cure him.
What?
Yeah, if you look at the previous scene, another inscription that is barely visible in frame seems to describe something about how Dragonglass can be used as a medicine to treat illnesses.
Okay, and then if we think about the only person that we've seen on this show to be kind of cured from grayscale was Shireen, named after Ed Sheeran. And it's possible that the remedy that the Maesters used on her would be from her home of Dragonstone, the natural Dragonglass that was all around the castle.
Yeah, and let's not stop there. The person who talked to Shireen about that experience, the person who might be able to bring this solution to the forefront, the possible hero of all of Westeros is right in this room. No, not Sam, Gilly.
Gilly and Shireen bonded at the wall in season 5 when Shireen taught Gilly how to read. Aw. And maybe Gilly would have some insight though on how Dragonglass plays into curing grayscale. All those maesters are gonna get schooled by Gilly.
Okay, let's move on to this final sequence at Dragonstone. Now, notice this is 5.5 minutes of no dialogue. So just like Sam's poop and soup montage and that opening 2-minute shot, it's so interesting how they're using editing to tell this story without using any words at all. The visuals are powerful enough.
We're actually gonna do an in-depth breakdown here of everything that's going on to tell the story of how Dany is finally back at her rightful familial home. Dragonstone was the home of Targaryens ever since Aegon the Conqueror landed there many millennia ago. It happens to have changed hands a couple of times since then, but this is her finally reconnecting with her actual birthplace and the birthplace of her family in Westeros. But again, talking about how the visuals are helping tell this story.
And let's start with the costumes, what everyone's wearing. Okay, so yes, Daenerys' clothes have changed from when she was Queen of Meereen in Essos. Past season, she wore whites and tans, the colors of that continent. But returning to Westeros now, she wouldn't really be dressed to the part if she was wearing that. So now she wears all black. In fact, everyone in her posse is wearing black.
These colors, probably advised to her by Tyrion, are the look of a true ruler in Westeros. Westeros. Other things helping her look the part too, notice the stiff shoulders that match the unsullied army she commands, the crimson cape that reflects Viserys' look, the black and the red. It's a lot like what Sansa's doing. Dany is embracing her past tormentors, wearing them like armor, and replacing Viserys as the famed Targaryen orphan that would return to Westeros with an army. And capes are really in right now, by the by.
And the chain, which the designer calls a chain of command, notice how it ends with this subtle dragon head headpiece, which isn't a full crown, and that's intentional because Daenerys hasn't conquered yet.
But also, it's not just about the visuals that are happening here. The music is also playing a huge part. Ramin Djawadi's House Targaryen theme is played in, but he mixes in the main Game of Thrones theme when she reaches the gates to signal that Dany is in Westeros now. She's joining the other power players in a major Westerosi seat of power, and she's officially entered the game.
And then inside we get more visual storytelling with the whole set design of Dragonstone. It's interesting to see why this place is so hard to siege. After the gates, you have to cross this long, narrow pathway that soldiers would pretty much have to climb in single file, while everyone in the castle will just rain down hell and arrows and rocks on them. In fact, I think this could be inspired by the Helm's Deep design in Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers.
And then carrying over the visuals from outside inside the Dragonstone throne room. The designers purposely made the throne look like the natural rock formations from outside freaking crashed into the room, and they just decided to turn that into the throne. And while it's way less ornate than the famous throne room in Westeros and King's Landing, they do have something in common. Potentially, if this is dragon glass, then those are both thrones that are made out of very important weapons.
And another thing in common with the King's Landing castle, just like Cersei did there, Daenerys is replacing the old insignia with the new. She tears down Stannis' banner, and notice how now the camera lingers on all this dragon imagery everywhere. We have the two big dragon heads outside, the dragon etched into the floor, and then the awesome dragon carving on the wall in the map room.
I still hope she's gonna bring like the Property Brothers in there to like do it right though. Yeah. But specifically, they don't need to touch the map room. This is Aegon Targaryen's map room. He built this table. Dany's grand times a lot grandfather was here and plotted his strategy for the entirety of his invasion of Westeros from this same room. It's like freaking George W. Bush planning another Iraq war from the same situation room that George Herbert Walker Bush did. I bet that was intentional. Just kidding, it wasn't.
But let's actually look closely at this shot. Notice how it's symmetrical. Again, that's a director trademark. And the reason he does that here is because it connects it back to that opening image from Bran's point of view. Remember, that was also symmetrical. And both of these shots show the biggest threats that Westeros has faced in a long time, both coming from different directions.
And focusing specifically on this closing shot though, note the 3 open windows. We noticed this, somebody tweeted it at us too. You guys are amazing, by the way, always do that, we love it. There are 3 spots open in the windows. 2 of them are filled. Daenerys, Tyrion, and who's gonna be the third one? What we refer to as the third head of the dragon. Jon?
But of course, this map is meant to parallel Cersei's giant map. In fact, Daenerys also looks like a giant as she's running her fingers along it. Meanwhile, Tyrion, just like Jaime in that previous scene, knows to stay away, letting the queen play Godzilla in this moment.
We're telling you, right? Maps were this recurring motif all throughout the episode, but it was totally on purpose. But now we understand that they're maps in the way that a game is played. These people have set their tables with their game board map. And now Dany's line, "Shall we begin?" sounds like she's about to make the first move in a game of chess.
Or rolling to see who gets to place that town on that precious wheat or sheep.
No Settlers of Catan.
Fine. Really, for all of these characters, the world as they know it is shrinking. They're all within striking distance of each other, and they're acutely aware of which direction their enemies are coming from.
Jon, Sansa, Cersei, Jaime, Euron, Sam, they're all feeling the impact of a Westeros with the walls closing in on them. To borrow Euron's words, it's about to get really crowded in here, and I think we're gonna see some legit battles all season long, but strategically, like you do in a game, and it's all gonna start at
Dragonstone.
And we're not done yet. We got some big predictions for where we think this is gonna go over the course of this season. First off, I think we're gonna get some big reunions with Arya. In fact, if you were watching closely during the opening credits, they added a new location that we quickly flew by, the Inn at the Crossroads. Now, this is the last known location of a couple fascinating characters. First, Nymeria, her direwolf, who ran away in the woods around here, and then the big character everyone's been asking about, Hot Pie.
Oh yeah, there's also another character I think is familiar with that place, who's been on a boat for a long time. Could he have gone back there? But also, another prediction, Littlefinger's past meddling, I think it's gonna catch up to him this season. I think there's a reason that we keep seeing this dagger show up. Him and Bran are gonna be at Winterfell at the same time. Could he expose him? Is Littlefinger's time nearing an end? Will he survive? Why do I keep going to that voice? All these questions need answers.
And final prediction, I think Team Daenerys is gonna suffer more than Team Cersei over this season. Like, I know things seem down for Cersei right now, but I think that's intentional. Fortunes always flip on this show. And I really think most of Daenerys' alliance will either die or face some kind of crippling defeat. Or if she wins, she'll just squeak by. Like, I don't think Cersei will let her reap the rewards of King's Landing.
But again, do not think Cersei's gonna come off safe. I actually forgot to point this out earlier when Cersei is declaring,
I'm the queen of the Seven Kingdoms.
well, you know what her dad Tywin would have said to that? We do, because he said it before.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
So she's not gonna do great either.
But let us know what you think in the comments. You can hit us up directly, also on Twitter at EAVoss.
BMO.
And you can follow New Rockstars on Twitter at New Rockstars.
Also watch Westeros Weekly. It's really great with Montagare. We made a lot of predictions also specifically for just next week's episode, which is called Stormborn. Who's that in reference to? Actually, a lot of people. We'll explain.
And yeah, remember to share this video on Twitter. And if you follow us and go through those steps, remember, you'll be eligible for this awesome Funko Pop giveaway.
Also, huge thanks to our girl, our Patreon supporter, Kelly Hopper. A lot of you are Patreon supporters, and we're gonna have some announcements at our Patreon real soon that I think are so exciting.
We'll, of course, be back next week. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see us play Settlers of Catan on this channel, tweet at me. No, yes, it's just me now. Mom is getting hot.
What's that what you do?
We gotta cut Gypsy.